away. Seth Goldstein has taught at Mecca, but I found out about him because I like to go to other historical websites and see who they have as speakers. And when I read about your success at the Maine Society in Portland and at Kennebec, you did a Zoom with them, I believe. I was really curious. And I'm even more curious now because of the walks that he leads, the historic walks in Portland. So I think we'll be hearing more from him. But this evening, we're going to be learning about Pirates of New England because this is one of his passions as a history teacher, and now running the development for the South Portland Historical Society programming. So he's a busy man. So we're lucky to have him, and thank you so much for coming. And so,
thank you.
Yes.
Can you shut off that bank of lights?
Oh yeah, can we shut these lights off here?
Let me work on that.
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay. Well, thank you, Seth, for coming. This is Seth Goldstein.
All right, so can you folks over here see the screen okay? Because this pillar is in the way. So you might want to move a little bit. And I'll probably stand like right around here and do my slides. So if I'm in your way or this pillar is in your way, you might want to move.
Just try and get these lights off.
Oh, so you put the lights off above the people instead of the...
I'm trying to shut it.
There you go. I think that's more than sufficient. I'm worried people are going to fall asleep now. Well, I'm very engaging, and you shan't fall asleep while I'm speaking. So my name is Seth Goldstein, and I am a maritime historian, and I don't need a microphone. But I grew up on Cape Cod, where I developed my passion for maritime history, and I've been studying maritime history for as long as I can remember, my whole life. My dad was a high school librarian on Cape Cod, and he would bring home books about local Cape Cod shipwrecks for me. And so the joke here is I must have been a weird kid because I was transfixed by these, pretty horrific stories at a young age. And still today, I remember one of the shipwrecks that I read about when I was 7 or 8 years old. Well, some of you may know Cape Cod juts out into the Atlantic Ocean like thus. There's always the graveyard of the Atlantic. People will say, no, Cape Hatteras is the graveyard of the Atlantic. I don't want to argue graveyards of the Atlantic, right? Suffice to say that Cape Cod is one of the graveyards of the Atlantic, and the reason being is it projects out to the Atlantic Ocean, and before the Cape Cod Canal was built during the Great Depression, any shipping going from New York to Boston or Boston to New York would have to sail around Cape Cod, and this is what we call the backside of the Cape, or when I was a kid, we call it the outer beach. If a storm came up and the wind was blowing in this direction, well, the captain of a historic sailing vessel just really had one option, that was to throw out the anchors and pray. Well, very often those prayers were not enough, and the ships would wind up washed up on the backside of Cape Cod. And I still remember this one wreck. They had a cargo of jute, which is a type of fiber that they would carry around historically. And so this happened during the winter. Ship was washed up on the backside of Cape Cod, and so the sailors climbed into the rigging of this historic sailing vessel to escape the icy cold sea spray. Well, that's where they were found in the morning, entombed in ice, frozen to death, still clinging to the rigging. And I thought that was awesome. Must have been a weird kid, right? The other thing that happened while I was growing up on Cape Cod was in 1984, a gentleman by the name of Barry Clifford discovered the wreck of the pirate ship Witta. And I'll tell you about the Witta tonight because she's the first ever authenticated pirate ship wreck ever discovered in world history, right next to my backyard when I was a kid growing up. Very formative event in my life, and so once again, one of these things that propelled me onto a career as a maritime historian. I did my undergraduate work at the University of California in Santa Cruz, where our mascot is the banana slug. As you can imagine, strikes fear into the heart of all of our athletic opponents, right? Did my graduate work at Northeastern University, and I hold a master's degree in global historical theory. But what I really like to do is I like to take local history and put it in the context of global history. And maritime history is the perfect avenue to do that. I wrote my master's thesis about New England whalers. It was quite the whaling industry where I grew up in southeastern Massachusetts. Fascinating topic. You have these guys sailing all around the world in pursuit of whales, multi-ethnic crews, indigenous American, formerly enslaved African, free African, Pacific Islanders, what they would call Kanakas, people from Tahiti, Fiji, Hawaii. Eventually these whalers followed the whales up into the Arctic, and they're some of the first people to have contact with the Inuit. So all sorts of really interesting things. Wrote a 100-page paper about New England whalers, so I could talk your ear off about it. Not what I'm here to talk about tonight. Other research interests include piracy, as you can imagine, the historic North Atlantic fishery, the lighthouses and life-saving service, and my research in the last couple of years, this is what you should bring me back for, is what was known as the West Indies trade. This was the economic relationship between Maine and the luxury-producing plantations in the West Indies where enslaved Africans labored in horrific conditions. There's not even a word for how horrific the conditions were. These people were worked to death to produce the molasses, rum, and sugar that were consumed in Maine in exchange for salt cod, lumber, barrels, beets, parsnips, you name it. And so that's what my research has been on the last couple of years. I recently lectured at the Maine Historical Society on that topic, the Bath Maine Maritime Museum, just a fascinating topic. And so, I try to differentiate between nostalgia, what we kind of want to remember as history, and actual history, what really took place. And that is what my research reflects. So I also do tours of Portland, the Freedom Trail, which was 16 markers specific to the Black experience in Portland, all sorts of information about the Underground Railroad, and this amazing community of free Black people who lived in Portland who assisted their brothers and sisters in escaping to freedom. So another great story that I'm happy to share. I just want to warn folks, I do discuss some torture in this lecture, because pirates tortured people, and I will be discussing that. So trigger warning, if this is something that's going to make you uncomfortable, then I would say maybe this lecture is not for you. We're not going to talk about torture the whole time, but there will be some kind of gruesome stuff discussed. Okay? Wonderful. Oh, and I'd like to hold my questions till the end of the lecture. I'll do about a 50-minute lecture, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for a Q&A. So hold your questions, please. So the golden age of piracy, 1650 to 1750, can be broken into three distinct periods. First, you have the Buccaneers, 1650 to 1680. Now, this is very interesting. They get their name from the French word boucan, which is a type of grill that people would have used for smoking meat in the Caribbean. And so it had been a grill made out of green wood, and this was a method of cooking that they got from the indigenous Americans, preserving meat. And so you had mainly these French guys who were on islands like Hispaniola, and they would hunt these feral cows and pigs, and then they would smoke the meat over these boucans, and then they would sell that preserved meat to passing ships that were going by. It was a very rough lifestyle, but this is very interesting. So I'm fascinated by food and history, and the intersection of food and history is particularly interesting to me. This is where we get barbecue from, people, right? This was the origins of barbecue.